Morning everybody. I'm trying not to be too enthusiastic in my greeting this week because last week when I played the video back I almost deafened myself with my hello everybody, so I'm trying to be a bit more modulated this week. What I thought we'd look at this week, having looked at in the last two videos the basic lighting of charcoal and the different types of receptacles that you can get to burn your incense in, I was going to look at the types of incense that are available, and what we're going to move on gradually to is putting a blend together. So the ingredients that you will need for a blend are, first of all, the resins. Then you may want to include some woods, some spices, some herbs, and last of all, essential oils. When you make a blend, you can find lots and lots of recipes for blended incense. Some of them don't include resin, tree resin. Now, I don't like using these because if you just put woods, herbs and spices into a blend, you will get a very quick woof of bonfire which will burn off suddenly and won't leave any lingering smell. So what I always do, and what I recommend that you do, is you start off with a good base of what we call resin. Now when you're choosing your ingredients, largely it depends on the purpose for which you're burning incense. And I'll go into this in more detail as we go through different blends. It could be that you're doing spell work and you want a spell for healing. It could be that your incense is to burn at a particular ceremony or Sabbath, in which case you might want to call in different gods, different energies, different goddesses, in which case you need to look at your correspondences, because just about everything on the planet has a magical correspondence. And again, we'll get a little bit more into detail with correspondences. But for example, if you want a lot of fiery energy, you might call on substances that are ruled by the sun. If you want sort of psychic, mystical influences to be called in, you might look at substances whose ruling planet is the moon, which is largely in charge of psychic aspects. Some people ask how correspondences originated, where they came from. Well, they've really always been with us for as long as philosophers have been writing about magical substances. Culpeper, for example, gives a lot of correspondences in his famous work. For correspondences, I got several books, but there's two that I'd like to perhaps recommend to you at this moment. The first one is called Herbcraft, and it's by Anna Franklin and Susan Lavender. Now this goes through a lot of resins, herbs, spices. It gives all the correspondence, all the planetary rulers, all the links to the gods and goddesses in the different pantheons. It also does the health benefits of a lot of the substances, and also the folklore and the magical aspects of a lot of these substances. So that is a very, very useful reference book. Herbcraft, A Guide to the Shamanic and Ritual Use of Herbs by Susan Lavender and Anna Franklin, and it's published by Capel Ban. The second go-to for me, quick reference book, is Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. Now, whatever we think of Scott Cunningham, I do find his basic information as regards correspondences really quite useful, and this is a very easy book to use. Everything's in alphabetical order. The only slight problem with it is of course Scott Cunningham was an American, and so in here we find some substances, some herbs, which are American, native to America, and which we don't easily find in England, but nevertheless a very useful reference book. The other thing that you might find useful when you're blending incenses is pestle and mortar. Now, like I'm a little bit of a fan of censers, incense burners, and I have several, I'm also a bit of a fan of the pestle and mortar, so I pick them up wherever I can. Don't use these for your incenses only. I've got a set that I use for culinary purposes and a set that I use for incenses. Don't try and interchange them, because you won't easily wash the incense, especially the resins. You won't easily wash the smell and the grains out. So these and several others I keep just for blending incenses. Marble or ceramic, I find, are the best materials, not wood, not metal. So I've got a marble one here and the other one is a ceramic. Okay, first of all, the resins. Now, I recommend that any blend that you start with a good whack of tree resin. Tree resin is what happens when you damage the bark of a tree, and it exudes from the wound, it exudes a sap which is designed to protect the tree. Now this is probably the most commonly known resin. This is frankincense, and it's used as a base in lots of incenses. It's from the boswellia tree. It's ruled by the sun and its element is fire. And this forms the basis of a lot of blended incense. Next up, I suppose another well-known one, not least of which because of the Bible story, is myrrh. Now myrrh I always put in my Samhain incense because it has associations with death, and it's also meant to link or create a portal to the astral. So I usually put this in my Samhain incense. The reason it's associated with death is because the ancient Egyptians used to use it as an embalming resin. Well, some people attribute it to the moon and other people to the sun, but either way, its ruling element is water, so I would go for moon myself. Then we have, and this is the reason, these are the reasons why a pestle and mortar is somewhat useful, because sometimes the resins come in lumps like this. This is pine resin, and they need smashing up. Now usually I smash them up and put them in jars when I sell them, but you know, some of them like this take a lot of smashing. This is one of my favourites. This is another tree resin. This is benzoin. It's got a beautiful smell, but when it burns, the smoke, although the smell is pleasant, the smoke itself is very acrid. So if you get your sniffer a bit too close to the smoke, it catches on the back of your nose, on the back of your throat. So when you're burning this, I'd advise you to keep your nose at a distance, although the smell is actually very, very pleasant. And this I'm going to mention, this is dragon's blood. This is a resin that comes from the Dracaena palm, which grows in the Canary Islands. It's a powdery red resin, and it is actually used to make dragon's blood ink. It's very, very expensive. I don't know why, because if you've ever been to the Canaries and you've ever seen the dragon's blood trees, they do, once they're wounded, they exude an awful lot of resin. In actual fact, you can see masses and masses of graffiti on the Dracaena palms because people carve their initials into the trees just to see the blood of the tree weep out. So why it is actually so expensive, I really don't know. But sometimes if you work in a spell and you want to kickstart your spell, dragon's blood will add that extra bit of oomph. So just a tiny pinch in an incense will actually help to kickstart the magic. It's also very, very highly protective. So those are some of the resins. There are a lot more. And I'm only going through them very briefly now, but as I use them individually, we'll go into them in a bit more detail. The next ingredient, the other ingredient, is woods. Now you can get various woods. This is cedar wood. This is England, actually. This is produced in England, and it's a very warm, spicy, woody smell. It's lovely and very, very inexpensive. So that's one wood. Another wood, there are lots of woods. Another wood is yellow sandalwood. And we have to be quite careful with yellow sandalwood because of course it comes from India and the trees are endangered. So if you're going to use yellow sandalwood, try to get it from a sustainable source. Ours is from a sustainable source, produced by a very reputable company. Very nice, very warm, very good for meditation. So that's a good one to include. Then we come to less specialist ingredients where you can raid your garden, raid your spice cupboard, or the herb and spice area in the supermarket, because another very useful ingredient is cinnamon. It's ruled by the sun and its element is fire. Now again, this would need crushing up, but you can equally use the powdered stuff that you get in a herb bottle. That's fine, but this just happens to be a roll of neat cinnamon bark. We have cloves here. Cloves crushed up in a pestle and mortar make a very good inclusion. I usually put them in my Yule blend. We all know cloves, and you can buy powdered clove, that's fine. We come on to the herbs, and what we have here is bay, dried bay leaves. Very, very useful ingredient in magic for dispelling negativity. It's again ruled by the sun and its element is fire. And there are various simple spell recipes that you can get for using bay leaves. Rosemary, a very useful protective herb, and again you can pick from the plant and dry it, or go to the supermarket and buy the jar of rosemary. Weeds, what we call weeds, any plant, they all have correspondences, they all have magical uses just as they have health uses. Nettle is ruled by Mars, and it's a very protective herb. So, you know, don't forget the margins of your garden and the nettles and the cleavers and the jack by the hedge that grows there, because they all have their uses in incense. Lavender, of course, is a fabulous inclusion. Again, it's ruled by Mercury and its element is air, and it adds a very, very nice smell. And the final ingredient that I like to put in my incenses is essential oil. Again, they've all got their correspondences, and I like to use an oil that marries with the other ingredients in the incense that I'm using. So for example, if I'm doing my Samhain incense, I could put a couple of drops of myrrh in, because the myrrh forms the basis of my Samhain incense. But you can choose whatever essential oil you like. Just one word of warning: when you're adding the oil, the essential oils are very, very strong. So a drop, mix, smell. Because if you've had, and we've found in our workshops, that if you add too much oil, it will completely change the character of the incense that you're blending. So one drop at a time, 3 drops max, otherwise you'll have something that just smells of your essential oil. It also helps to dampen the incense a little bit, which slows down the burn rate. So those are the ingredients, those are the types of ingredients for blending. You don't have to use them all, you don't have to use one of everything. You can choose depending on the purpose of your incense. So start with the resin, have a good whack of resin. You've got your woods and the various types of these, I've only shown 2 today. You've got your spices, your herbs and plants, your botanicals if you like, and your essential oils. And generally you add them in that order. Now, what I'm going to talk about next week is I'm going to give you a simple recipe, a simple but very effective recipe, an all-purpose blend with only 3 fairly readily available ingredients, and we're going to talk about the use of the pestle and mortar. When you're blending an incense, the consistency of it depends on you. Some people like a very powdery incense, a very fine powdery incense, and other people like it quite lumpy. I like it quite lumpy. So that all depends on how much work you're prepared to do with the pestle and mortar, or whether you've got some other piece of grinding equipment like a herb mill or a spice mill or something like that, that you only use for your incense purposes. Okay, that's it for this week. Feel free to ask any questions when this goes up on the group. And what I'm going to do this week, is we're going to put up on the page all the resins that we offer for sale. So if you watch this video and you want to hop over to the page and see what resins we've got for sale, then please do that. Okay, so we'll be back next week with an incense recipe. Bye.